Welcome back to Open Your Eyes. For our first segment, we are joined by the Minister of Sustainable Development and Climate Change, the Honorable Orlando Habet. Good morning, Minister. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and good morning, Belize.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on, Minister. We don't often get to have these conversations with you where we look at some issues that people may not always see as important, but it's quite important. For example, we're in the hurricane season, and a huge part of your responsibility has to do with disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction, correct?
Well, I had that under my
You
portfolio.
had that under your portfolio.
Until about 4 or 5 months ago, it was removed. It's now under Minister Perez.
Correct.
Right, but our ministry, because of the sustainable development portfolio, we have to look at all of these issues on a national scale.
Yeah, so on a national scale, let's talk a bit, before you gave up that ministry, which was in the middle of the hurricane season, what were some of the goals or some of the achievements you and your team were able to accomplish where disaster risk management is concerned?
Yes, well, if we look at the meteorology department, I think there was significant change since we had taken office. Certainly a building is something that needs to be constructed to be able to host the meteorology department. We have, I think, over the entire ministry, people with very good capacity in almost all the areas. But I think there we had the repairs of the radar, the personnel are being trained, the reports are targeted and focused. So I think there was a lot of changes in there. In terms of the fire department, as you know, we did significant change, moving the concept of fire to fire and rescue, trained almost all of our personnel to be able to do the emergency management service. Just I think about 2 weeks ago, there was a report saying that we have one of them now being trained as a paramedic, and hopefully we can get more people going in there. So it's significant. Brought in about 10 ambulances, and I think like 3 or 4 were already on the pipeline to come in. So there were significant changes. In terms of personnel though, brought up their salaries to where they should be, the promotions to where they should be, because as I mentioned earlier, you can have all the new equipment, the ambulances, the trucks, the building, but if you don't take care of the personnel, you're not doing much. With NEMO, I think significant changes also. We were in the process of sort of making a real transformation within NEMO to be able to look at not only the day of the disaster, but in terms of preparation, because we have several committees, and that's something that many people don't understand. They think that NEMO is only that little office, but it involves several committees that include various sectors where CEOs and heads of departments are involved. Also to look at the day of the disaster and what we can do then, involving the police, Coast Guard, and all the units that usually assist us, and kudos to them, search and rescue especially, but also in terms of post-disaster risk management and looking at the assessment of the damage, because we have to try to see how we can get funding for recovery. And the faster we do that, the faster we can get the funding for recovery. But many times capacity and resources are some of the deterrents for us to be able to do it as quick as possible.
What is this? Any of this funding for resources to recovery efforts come under any sort of climate change initiatives, or can it be requested under any sort of climate change policies or legislation?
Not under climate change currently. We depend on the good heart, the goodness of some of our neighboring countries, the bigger countries who usually assist us. Luckily, because of one of the SDGs in terms of SDG 17, the Partnership for the Goals, we usually get assistance from the US, Mexico, even Cuba at times when it is needed. And however, within CARICOM, we have SEDIMA, and we have an insurance policy, which we barely get anything from it because it needs to be triggered by a certain threshold. And that is why I said we have to have a capacity to be able to do these assessments as quick as possible.
Threshold in terms of destruction?
Exactly, so that if it goes over a certain amount, then it triggers this insurance. We barely are able to access it, so we are also looking at reconsidering that insurance.
What are the relationships with some of the NGOs that are in the environmental fight as well? Because we know that, for example, personnel like Yashe and the Maya Trust Fund, they're all in this climate change action in order to safeguard some of our environmental posts. So does the government assist some of these NPOs in their initiatives? What is that relationship like?
The relationship with the NGOs, especially those in protected areas management, has always been great. We've had a little disagreements, but I think for the record, for example, the assistance that we get through the Protected Areas Management Trust Pact will always be there. That relationship is there. That's why it was created, in terms of what they get and how they get it, and that's a process where they have to put in their proposals for the work that they have to do within the protected area, and then the board does a review and then does the allocation. The last was that they had approached the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister sort of gave some instructions saying, well, you have to come together, form a task force, look at the problems holistically. Part of the problem was that they thought that we did not give sufficient time to look at the amendments to the legislation, and so they needed more time to be able to get their inputs. We're trying to do that now. So we formed that task force. We had, I think, 3 meetings, and so they're coming together with the ministry to be able to look at those pieces of legislation and craft it in such a manner that it will serve the purpose for the ministry, the government, and also for the work that they do as protected areas managers.
In terms, so we're talking there about the land use policy, or more of a...
More along the monies really that the
okay.
co-managers receive, and how they receive it, timeliness, whether or not they get 100% of what they propose, and what portions they get at what time, how that money is used for the co-management. Is it only for salaries? Is it going to be invested in the rangers who actually do the work? Is it going to be a portion has to be invested for the development of the area? There is in many of them potential for tourism, so is some of it being invested to open up that avenue for tourism to be able to get in some revenues? And if that is the case, who does the collection? Where does that money go? Does it go to the protected areas manager, or is it considered part of payment for environmental services for my using that area as tourism, and then it goes back to PAC for distribution? All those things are being considered.
Now, in terms of the efforts that a lot of these NGOs, conservationists undertake, we've been hearing constant cries for a proper land use policy to sort of aid in their efforts while guiding development. And I know this is a huge issue under sustainability, because on one end you want to have development, but on the other end Belize is rich with forest and marine life, and you also want to have conservation. What are the discussions surrounding land use policy that works for all?
Yes, so we have had a land use policy before. The problem has been implementation. There has been concerns for many years, and we have seen how the lack of a land use policy and the implementation of such has led to deterioration, degradation of our lands, and the wrong use of certain lands and areas for the wrong purposes, whether it's agriculture, whether it's tourism, and everything else. We've seen that traditionally Belizeans wouldn't, for example, use the hills for doing agriculture, when we go down south, it's beautiful for you to go down because you're seeing all the scenery with the mountains. And we were accustomed to seeing, for example, orange orchards in the valley, but not on the hills. And if there was slightly on the hill, it was a cover of oranges or orange citrus plants. Now lately you've seen some of it going farther uphill. You've seen it being cut down completely to plant pineapple, which doesn't have a cover. So when the rains come, there's eroding of the soils, things like that. A serious one too is with agriculture. We haven't been able to say, okay, these lands, alluvial soils, sandy loam soils on the riverbanks, are those more adequate for agriculture, for doing vegetables? Some of it, a lot of it is being used for cattle production. Where do the chemicals go? Do they leach into the soil, the groundwater, things like that? And another serious one is in cities and towns for municipal expansion, because young people want a house lot. So when the government doesn't have any more national land, the government has to acquire private lands for distribution. And because there's a pressing need from the community, many times ourselves as politicians go to the Minister of Natural Resources and said, can you purchase this land for us to be able to have so many house lots for our residents? Now, is that land really adequate for housing? And I have, for example, in my constituency, an area behind the St. Ignacio Hospital where about 200 house lots were given out, and nobody lives there because it's been now since 2015, but it floods. I mean, 15 feet high, so those cannot be used. So the conversation with the minister now is, can we get another parcel of land somewhere else where we can relocate these people, and possibly the only use for that land might be a nice, beautiful tree park, which is something that we can do.
So what sorry, go ahead.
So we have, the Prime Minister had asked us to form a cabinet subcommittee, Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Natural Resources, and also the Ministry of Sustainable Development. And we have had participation from various other sectors, including the Ministry of Infrastructure and Housing, because it's all important. And so we have met. A consultant was hired some months ago, and the review of that policy, that draft policy, is being done. And I think on Friday, I couldn't attend that, possibly the last meeting to do the review because of the House meeting, but it is almost now at its final stages.
Wow. So what will that do for the efforts in general?
I think it will be significant. As I mentioned, I think the policy is one thing, but we'll have to make certain that there is coordination, that there is cohesion among these ministries and sectors, and then that there is implementation. Many times the implementation part is because of a lack of capacity,
and I think
but mostly
right?
capacity in terms of institutional capacity, because our ministries really have desks with one person, and you move them from that desk to do something, and then that area gets abandoned. So personnel is also important, and of course the lack of corruption is also important, because things with bribery and everything else, many times things can go under the table, and we don't do the right thing.
I wanted to tap into a small point that you made about land in municipal areas, because a part of your portfolio is indeed sustainable development. When it comes to the mapping out of, for example, Belize City, there are certain areas now. We just had the King Tide, I believe, last month, where parts of like the Pickstock area and that entire North Front Street was completely underwater, and so forth. And the engineering of the city itself is established, so there's nothing really we can do about that. But when it comes to the sustainability of this city, San Ignacio, Belize, Belmopan, and so forth, what are some of the efforts that your ministry can do to perhaps relieve some of these incidents, because it's going to happen again? And I know we have the canals and the different engineering systems to assist in flooding, but there's no doubt that Belize City is technically underwater, right? So are there certain efforts that your ministry are doing to relieve these situations, these issues, sorry?
So the alleviation of the waters, for example, in this case, which is very important, might be a difficult task. I know that from what I've read and what I've heard, the canal system was very important for doing a lot of that. With things like the king tide, which are really occasional, it becomes a problem. So we have to see how we can deal with that. I think the engineers would be more apt to respond to that part of it. From our side, we are working with the municipalities on a program called Cities and Urban Areas for greening of the areas, because planting trees, asking residents to leave trees when they get a house lot, that really helps with the absorption of water, and so it goes into the underground, and that will help. But I think part of the problem is that Belize City doesn't have much more and where to expand. So I think we have to look elsewhere out of the city itself, Boom, going up north or going to the west, where people can be relocated, and that will be, I think, part of the best solution to deal with it. If we would have the funding, then perhaps it will be looking at how buildings will start to be high-rise buildings, because there's no more area to expand within Belize City. In the past, we've heard about problems that we'd had where certain areas were used for housing, which shouldn't have been. And so you start building in the swamps, and these low-lying areas, which are water catchment areas, are being destroyed because now we're putting people to live in there. So these are some of the things that we have to work on.
Are we making any progress with modernized cruise port policy?
I think the cruise port policy has been worked on by that ministry and department. I think that there's still some policy cohesion that has to be organized, so that then the Ministry of Sustainable Development, the Port Authority, the Ministry of Blue Economy have to come together to relook at it, to see where it is that we really want to go. I think Plan Belize was really instrumental, but it looks at a 5-year plan, but the way it is structured and the things that are within Plan Belize really takes it up to at least 8 or 10 years.
What does Plan Belize say about cruise ports?
Well, it doesn't specifically give you, like, for example, how many ports will be required, how many cruise ships will go, but it tells you about allocating resources and allocating structures for the development of tourism. Yeah. But it doesn't specifically tell you where it's going. So each sector will have to decide where it is that we want to go. Remember, I think on previous conversations, there's some reports saying that a maximum of 2 million tourists per year would be where Belize can go. So where do those 2 million people fit in within the context of that 1-year plan? Yeah. Is it that we'll go 80% overnight and 20% cruise, or 50-50? Where is it? And then I think that will start to shape up what we need to do.
How is the growth of our population, I don't want to say affecting the imbalance of the way that we preserve our nature reserves, but we now have people going into the business of cattle ranching and so on, that are kind of moving into the different reserved lands. And I know we do have laws to protect that, but in the capacity of trying to start a business and ensuring that I'm able to feed my family, but also trying to maintain the sustainable development laws, how is that balance being handled by your ministry?
I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. Some is being done. The Ministry of Agriculture has now engaged in educating farmers in sustainable farming, resilient farming practices, incorporating into livestock maybe the planting of trees, so that you have what they call a silvopastoral system, in terms of agriculture doing the same thing. But there might be some sectors within or subsectors within the agriculture and livestock industry that are heeding. What we have to do is to try to get the bigger ones. Because I might have a 40-acre plot, And I'm trying to do what the Ministry of Agriculture is saying, because that is where the extension officers go. But the big ones who have 1,000, 2,000 acres, they have their own way of doing things, and they might not even be accessing the extension services and listening to what is being done. So by means of policy, then that is where it's going to go. Now, you have the problem even within the land use policy of where does the government fit in within the private sector in terms of, I have property for my land, how do you come now and tell me what do I do with it?
Correct.
Well, it has to be done whether it's private or national lands, and so that is how we'll have to bring it together. But indeed, what we have to do also, and in terms of the entire look of sustainable development, is the proper land use, as we were talking before, but also in making sure that we have efficiency in production. We might not need to have more land cleared for agriculture. We might not need more land for cattle production. What we have is already sufficient. We have to improve efficiency. So if I can produce 1 head of cattle on 1 acre of land or 1.5 per acre of land, then why is it that I need to have 5 acres? So that land thing, it's a technical thing. My specialization is in livestock science. But if you look at low pine ridge soils where it is poor, very little grass grows, then you might need 10 acres per animal. But is that the right use of that land?
But how does that help us as a growing nation? And I ask this in the sense that we're more of an import country than we are an export country. And the way that our population is growing, we will need not just to sustain us, but we'll also need to be able to still export some of these resources. And I understand that has like a very, very straight balance with ensuring that we don't go into nature reserve lands.
Right. But I think it starts with what it is that we can produce for export. Okay. The concept of export is not that I will export my surplus. It has to be production focused and geared and for export. So when you do that now, you have to assess what it is that we can produce feasibly. Because can I produce corn for export on a global market? No. You can't compete with the US, Ukraine, Brazil, Argentina. Soybean? No, we can't. But maybe we can within our region. So let us produce what we can for domestic consumption, our food security, and then we have a small market within Central America where we cannot produce the low quality that the other countries produce in mass production, but we can produce a high quality where we have a niche market for a higher value.
Interesting.
And that is why we have to.
I never thought about it like that. But Minister, what we're going to do is take a break, and when we come back, we'll have you when we come back still, and we'll be asking you a bit about our latest assessments, where our sustainable development goals are concerned. We also want to find out more about what's happening with new legislation where protecting Belize's ocean space is concerned, and why fishermen are so concerned about all of this happening, as well as some other legislative amendments and developments that have taken place under your ministry. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have Minister Habet with us to answer a few more of our questions. Stay tuned.